Welcome to Southern Home Talk. I'm Chuck Phillip with South Alabama Home Inspections. This is another edition of Hurricane Ready. This is part 3 of episode 42. And this one's pretty much focused to the equipment and supplies that you probably want to have on hand. And we're going to not putting the standard stuff on here like you'd see with some of your run-of-the-mill supply list. These are some things you probably never thought of before, and these are the type of supplies that I keep on hand. I think one of the most important items to keep on hand are these tarps. Hopefully you'll never need them, but if you ever got a hole in your roof, this is really a good way to cover that until you can get it patched. And in the right slide, we have a towel, garbage bags, an old metal garbage can. And I recommend keeping quite a few of these garbage bags on hand. I mean, there's all kinds of general purpose use for them. And your old towels, don't throw them away. Take one of these garbage bags and start filling that bag full of these, because these can come in handy to dry up water and also maybe place on the doors where water may be coming in. Now, as far as the metal can's concerned, these are pretty good because if you had a hole in the roof and it was leaking water into the house, these are far superior to plastic cans, and you can actually pick them up. You really can't do that with plastic garbage cans. And getting back to these tarps over here, I would certainly keep at least 2 or 3 of these on hand. One of the best grills I ever discovered is this charbroil grill. It's called a gas to coal, and it runs on both propane and charcoal, so you can use either one or both. And I picked this up at Lowe's about 2 years ago, but either way, if you got a gas or charcoal grill, this is something you can keep on hand for a long period of time, since really neither one of these things go bad. And what I like to keep stocked up on is Connecah sausage, but I'm sure any kind of sausage you like will work just as fine. And so the good thing about sausage, when you cook it, it usually lasts a pretty good while. And you can also take the hot dog buns and freeze them. Well, one thing about flashlights, I know that's in pretty much every standard hurricane to-do list, but it's really just as important to have the right kind of flashlights. And what I highly recommend is you get these head type lamps. The batteries that are in these are larger than your typical AA. They're kind of proprietary to this. And I recommend that you have one for each member of the family. The good thing about this is, if the lights go out, or not only that, you have to start moving around in darkness. You don't have to go searching for where you laid your flashlight. It's right there on the top of your head. But the most important thing is that you may have to have both hands free. I mean, an emergency may arise to where you will need both the light and both your hands, and that provides that. And these old military flashlights are still handy too, because you can't see it, but it's got a clip on the side. Take the old D batteries, and these can clip on your shirt pocket, and they're pretty rugged and they're weatherproof. Now, on this other slide, this is a very large LED lantern, and the battery in this is pretty big and will power this thing for around 12 hours. And there's a candle beside it, but this is what I don't recommend doing, because you get enough of these lit inside the house and they can actually add to the thermal load to it, and it's also kind of a fire hazard. So I really don't see the point in using candles anymore, especially when we have all this good technology. One of the top 10 products I think I recommend just having in general, and also come in handy during a storm, is one of these battery packs. I bought this one at Sam's Wholesale. And this thing will hold a charge for a long period of time without having to recharge this unit. And the good thing about this, you can actually jump off your generator if the battery was to go dead in that. But another thing, you can also charge up your cell phones through these USB ports. Pretty much everybody's gotten away from the old landlines, but even if you had one, I mean, chances are those lines will probably be out of service. But another thing too, with your cell phone, it's a possibility that some of these cell towers could be down, and that might not be useful either. And really, probably the thing to consider is getting a base station CB radio, or maybe even going to ham. Well, definitely one of the top 10 items I recommend are these weather radios. They've come a long way since the 1970s, like this old realistic here, and believe it or not, it still works. But I purchased one of these Midland models about a month and a half ago, and it's already come in handy 2 times. It's warned me for 2 different approaching thunderstorms. And the good thing about it is you can focus the warnings down just to the area that you're in. So you're not hearing warnings in other parts of the state. You can also focus what those warnings are. You can focus it down to thunderstorms, hurricanes, tornadoes, as many other things this will warn about. And it'll also alarm pretty loud. So if you're in one part of the house, you can hear the alarm go off pretty loud. I mean, it is pretty loud. And so it also tells you right here at the bottom, you can't really see. It tells you whether if it's a warning or advisory or a test. So, this is probably one of the best weather radios I've ever seen. One of the most important things I think everybody should have are these large fire extinguishers. I've got 4 of these water-filled ones, and the good thing about it, you can take your water hose and fill them up, and your air compressor will also charge this up as well. It's got the same sort of valve that's on your tire. And I also have 3 of these large dry chemical fire extinguishers. And what got me into these is I remember back in 1979, there was a neighbor in the back of the neighborhood right after Hurricane Frederick. His detached garage, it wasn't connected to the house, lightning hit it and caught it on fire, and the fire department couldn't get back there to put it out because all the roads were clogged up with debris. So this is a good reason to keep these on hand. If you have a small generator, it's probably a good thing to go out and purchase several of these window units. And you may not need that many of them if you have some good fans to go along with it, because if you have these in your bedrooms back there, you can put these fans in the hallway, and sometimes it can carry enough of the cool air down the hallway into the living area. So really, these things work best in conjunction with one another. So that's something else you want to purchase during the winter or maybe the early spring, because during hurricane season, the stores may run out of these pretty quick. I remember back during Hurricane Camille in 1969, my parents saved these old milk cartons, and the primary reason why they saved them was to put shrimp in and freeze it inside the freezer. But they also used it to make block ice with whenever a hurricane started approaching. And so it's a good idea to really keep all these old containers, especially the milk jugs. You can refill these with water, put them in the freezer, and it'll make block ice. Now, on the right side, you'll see a portable ice maker. And these are kind of handy as well because they'll make small batches of ice, but you can bag that as it goes and put it in your freezer so you'll have bagged ice afterwards. But if you have a built-in ice maker on your refrigerator, I recommend before the storm starts heading this way, especially within the first 8 hours of it, you probably start bagging that ice and putting that in the freezer as well. Well, this is another product you're not going to see on anybody's hurricane preparedness list. But this is really a good product just to have in general, and that's a very good vacuum sealer. The good thing about this particular model is it's not like the old Seal-A-Meal that you've seen on TV. This thing is pretty proprietary to use in large bags, and the good thing is they're only about 2 cents each. And so you can now go out to the grocery store and actually buy ground beef and steaks and vacuum seal them in this and put them in the freezer, and they'll stay for a much longer period of time than any other way of doing it. Now, this isn't something you necessarily have to have, but it is kind of a cool toy. I purchased this probably about 8 months ago. It's a Davis weather station, and this is the picture on the right is actually the monitor that's on the inside of the house, and it's also has a battery backup so it can be unplugged and moved around. But one of the things I really find important about this is the barometric pressure. I never really gave much thought to that until after I got this. But this right there, just monitoring that, has told me about approaching storms I couldn't even hear coming. But it has all the other functions. It measures both temperature and humidity outside and also inside the house, since this acts as a monitor too. So, it's not something you necessarily have to have, but it's probably good to have. I mean, the one thing is this wind gauge up here at the very top, it's actually rated for 130 miles an hour if it withstands that. So I just figured I'd put this up there, give you something to think about. I know some people like to stock up on MREs. You know, I remember the old sea rations back in the 60s and 70s, back in Hurricane Camille in 69 and Frederick 79. The Army was going around handing these out to some of the hurricane survivors. But really, I think the best practice is to pretty much buy what you like. And, you know, products like mac and cheese and beef ravioli, you know, these things have a pretty good shelf life, and water does too. And so I recommend that you know, buy enough of this, but at least none of this stuff will go to waste. I mean, you'll eventually be used, especially if you like these products. And I remember one time I was in a store and this guy was complaining about everybody buying up all the water. He says, that's kind of crazy buying water. You know, so all you got to do is turn the tap on at the house and get all the water you want. Well, the problem with that is if you have trees in the front yard and they blow over, it's possible it could uproot the water line. But not only that, it can also uproot the water main because this water main travels for miles and there's trees all around that entire route. So it's not unusual and it's not impossible that some of these water mains could be damaged. Well, if you have any pets, you have to keep them in mind as well. And if it's just pretty much a tropical storm coming through with maybe not too much wind and lightning, you might want to outfit your dog with a raincoat so he can go out and do his business. But if it's a hurricane, we're probably going to be faced with many, many hours of continuous heavy rain and wind, probably lightning involved in that as well. And so they're probably going to be encapsulated in the house for a long period of time. And so you may have to make provisions for them to use the restroom inside the house. And you might want to consider maybe getting some AstroTurf for that purpose. Well, one thing I'll say is if you're going to have a gas generator, you know, try to avoid buying a whole lot of plastic gas cans. And the better practice really is to go out and buy these metal jerry cans. They cost more money, but it's just a safer way to hold fuel. And it's probably one of the most hazardous aspects I think I've seen with as far as hurricane preparedness. I mean, you're tempted to want to keep a lot of gasoline on hand, and it's just really not safe to do that because of its explosive and flammable nature. Now, on the other hand, if you have a disconnect unit like on the wall here, some of these are fused. And so if you don't have spare fuses for this, it's possible some of these could blow out and you're going to be without air conditioning. So it's just something to think about. You need to go to your hardware store and get extra fuses, but you really need to go out there first to find out what kind of disconnect you got. Well, after the storm is done passed over, I mean, it's still a living hell because it's created usually a big mess to clean up. And not only that, it's displaced a lot of wildlife and it's also displaced a lot of snakes too. And so if you're going to be out in your yard working, I recommend that you get a very good pair of boots. And like these snake boots here, you may not necessarily have to go and get snake boots. I mean, but I would at least get some good heavy duty rubber boots. That'd be better than being out there in your tennis shoes because there's going to be snakes running around your neighborhood. They're going to move to the high ground and your yard's probably going to be it. So you're going to have to watch out for those snakes running around the neighborhood. They're going to be out. And another thing that's going to be out is mosquitoes. And they're going to be out in force too, especially after the storm's passed. I don't know what it is about that, but they are definitely out in force right after a hurricane passes. And these are some things that you should buy before the season begins because they have a good shelf life. And you know what you're looking at here is Colton's Naturals. It's actually a natural mosquito repellent. It's made of cedar oil and garlic, and it's a concentrate. So this stuff goes a long way, and it's also relatively safe to use. And I'd also recommend keeping a half a dozen cans of off, and maybe if you don't have the Coltons, maybe get some of this Cutter Backyard Guard, you know, to spray around and maybe kill mosquitoes with that. But they're going to be a huge problem. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that straight up. And of course, I guess it'll depend mainly where you live, but I don't know of any place down here that doesn't have mosquitoes. Okay, this item on the left is something you're probably not going to see on anybody's hurricane list, but it's actually kind of a good item to have, and that's this chafing dish. You can buy these alcohol burners by the case, and they last a long time, and it's really good for keeping food warm. On the right, you see a small first aid kit, but I recommend having some heavy duty first aid equipment like large bandages and gauzes in case you get hurt or your neighbor gets hurt out there moving limbs or get cut by a chainsaw. There's just all sorts of things that can cause, some pretty good significant injuries to you. So I would keep some high quality first aid equipment on hand more than just band-aids. Thanks for taking the time to watch this slide presentation. And also please subscribe to Southern Home Talk. And we also have other videos about hurricane preparedness. We also have other videos that address all the issues that affect our houses here in South Alabama. Thanks again.